Hi friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we're going to take a walk down memory lane and discuss what teaching and learning was like in the late 90s and early 2000s as a millennial. I got this whole idea based on a comment I got on my last video. They ended up deleting it, but essentially when I said that teachers nowadays are only here to babysit, entertain, and desperately try to persuade unmotivated students, they said something to the effect of, well, of course, that's a teacher's job. What else would you be hired for? And immediately I remembered my own education, and that was never the case for my teachers. So I want to talk about that today, and I would love you, the viewer, to tell me what generation are you from, and think about what were your teachers like, and what were your responsibilities as a student. I believe all the changes that we're seeing today are happening because there has been mindset and belief changes that are so subtle many people have not recognized them. So let's get specific. One major change has been the idea that learning should be easy and fun. Now that sounds great, right? What's wrong with that? Well, the hard truth is that learning is often difficult and boring. In fact, most of the things that are valuable in all of life have aspects that are very challenging. So what was classroom education like for a millennial? Even as early as 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, teachers ran the classroom as if it was a college course. Teachers lectured, they wrote notes on the board that the students were expected to copy. If they were really fancy, they had a PowerPoint presentation. Students were expected to memorize things. We were expected to do homework, projects, and we had tests that we were expected to actually study for. We were expected to pay attention no matter how boring the teacher was. And we could never use the excuse that we didn't get a good grade because we didn't like the teacher. We were expected to research for papers and essays from actual books, although the internet was available as a backup. And honestly, there wasn't a ton of interactive activities. There wasn't a ton of partner and group work. Sure, it happened sometimes. And in some classes, we had more discussions than others. But at the end of the day, we were expected to put forth our part to learn the content. Whether the teacher was our favorite, whether they were addressing our specific learning style, whether we liked the way the classroom looked and smelled, we realized that we were there for a purpose, and that was to learn whatever it was the teacher was up there talking about. And that was the end of it. And if we failed, it was on us. If we misbehaved, it was on us. And even though that style of learning had its challenges, we got a lot of great skills. We learned that we had to adapt. Every teacher was different. Different teachers had different expectations. They had different rules. They enforced different rules. And we had to mold ourselves to each teacher instead of each teacher being expected to mold themselves to 100+ students. And I'm sure that you can all relate to the fact that you need that skill in the job force one day. We also learned to use the resources that were available to us. I still remember one teacher, we'll call him Mr. Graff, and he taught 11th grade chemistry, and I thought that he was a terrible teacher. And by today's standards, he would have been considered a terrible teacher. He didn't really explain things well. He was super boring. Sometimes in class, all we would do is read passages of the textbook and answer questions. It was rough. And when you asked Mr. Graff a question, his first question back to you would be, did you read the textbook? And this was a really difficult, dense, challenging, again, boring textbook. So the truth was, many of us hadn't. But he had the policy that he wasn't going to take his time to explain something that we didn't even bother to read. Now, you may or may not agree with his style, but the truth is, I realized I wasn't really learning from Mr. Graff, and I needed to take the responsibility to read the textbook myself and see if I could find any other resources and get help. Now, fast forward to today, this would have been a dream. We have YouTube videos that can teach any concept under the sun. There's all kind of free courses online. There's free interactive tutors online. There's ebooks and audiobooks and just so many free resources to help students. Yet I think that they are so conditioned to believe that everything is the teacher's responsibility that many are not even trying to learn if they hit a genuine challenge. I think sadly today's students are lacking grit, accountability, self-discipline, concentration, and any kind of attention span. Now, again, not all of this is their fault. We're all shaped by the circumstances we find ourselves in, which is why I think these conversations are so important. We have to think about what are we setting students up for in the future. In modern education, there is such an emphasis on student choice. Modern educational philosophy basically says that students should never have to endure anything that they consider boring. This comes out in very practical ways. I was used to there being class sets of novels that the whole entire class would read together. We read all the classics, like To Kill a Mockingbird and Fahrenheit 451 and 1984, and so many other great books. When I became a teacher, I was very excited to do class novels. In some years it was allowed, but eventually I was told, oh, but what if the students don't like the book? You can't have them read something that they find boring or that they don't like. So there was this big movement for student choice in books, and the experts would say it doesn't matter if all they want to read is Captain Underpants, that as long as they were happy, that's all that matters. I found that very problematic. We were also encouraged to make these things called choice boards for students where they get a menu of all of these different options for what they want to do for their assignment, what they want to do for homework, which really equaled to nobody doing homework anyway. But again, there was this huge emphasis on the student has to be happy, they have to like what they're doing. But do you really think that helped anything? Spoiler alert, no, it didn't, because they still didn't do the work, they still didn't take it seriously, they still whined and complained. Because the truth is, nothing's going to compare to a TikTok video, nothing's going to compare to a video game. If we don't teach students to value challenging things that we know will be good for them and will be enriching, but it requires some hard work, then young people as well as adults will always default to the easiest possible option. It's like modern educational philosophy has completely forgot how students are. Which leads me to the next major problem in education, and that is the crazy idea that there shouldn't be negative consequences for negative choices, actions, and behaviors. Now, this manifests itself in all kinds of different ways, but some fairly obvious ones have to do with work itself. Back in my day, if I didn't turn in an assignment, I had a 0. If I turned something in 2 weeks late, I could have lost 30 points on that assignment. Back in those days, grades actually mattered. They actually determined whether you passed or failed, which is not a thing anymore. We were actually expected to follow directions. If the teacher said, please don't write something in red pen, they actually meant, please don't write something in red pen. And you might actually be expected to redo it, or you might lose points, or something would happen because there was an expectation set and you failed to meet it. These days, teachers are told you can't take off points for students not following directions. They'll say, oh, that's a behavioral issue and not an academic issue, so it shouldn't reflect itself at all in the grade. Do you think this helps bring up higher quality work? Absolutely not. The quality of work has gone down every single year since I started teaching in 2013. Again, when you lower the standards, people tend to put forth the least possible effort. And even though we didn't like it back in the day, we actually had people holding us to expectations and we were expected to be able to meet them. I actually think the way students are babied and pandered to is an insult to them. It's like we're telling them, we don't think you're capable of anything. We don't think you know how to read directions. It's kind of depressing. Of course, this also applies with behaviors. Thinking back in the day, I really didn't see teachers get disrespected. The absolute worst I ever saw was in 8th grade, and there was this boy that called the teacher earmuffs. She had kind of a short hairdo, but her hair covered her ears a little bit, and everybody thought that was so scandalous and couldn't believe he would do that. Fast forward to modern teaching, and I've been called the B word to my face. Students have made memes about me and spread them all over the internet. Students have felt free to make very uncomfortable comments about my body and appearance, things that we never would have imagined saying to an adult back in the day. And why is this? Because they know they're not going to get in trouble for it. Modern teachers are expected to accept any kind of treatment, and we are low-key blamed for it. The first question that will likely come out of anybody's mouth, including the student's parent, an administrator, the counselor, will be, well, what did you do that they called you the B word? And truth be told, it was probably something as simple as saying, ladies, please stop whispering in the back. I kid you not. A lot of these weird educational policies, in addition to weird societal changes, has created the angriest, most rebellious, most disrespectful generation that has ever existed. And much of this would be curbed if we brought consequences back. And not the kind where you sit in a kumbaya circle and share your feelings. That is not a consequence for most young people. They think it's a super funny, hilarious joke. And they say so later. So what else has changed? Thinking back on my teachers from way back when, they seem much less stressed, much more free, and honestly, much happier. Many of them genuinely seem to enjoy their job because they were trusted as professionals. They were not constantly micromanaged. Even though we did still have standardized tests, it's not like education completely revolved around them. We might focus on them for a month at the end of the year, and teachers could use a lot more creativity. Things went at a much more realistic pace, and teachers had a lot more freedom to be themselves. And when I say that, I mean in regards to their personality. I feel like in modern teaching, there's this weird unicorn teacher that we're all supposed to exemplify somehow. That's just not realistic. I remember back in the day, we had some quiet teachers, some introverted teachers, some gregarious, spontaneous, funny teachers, but it was clear that they felt free to be themselves. Whereas nowadays, I've been in buildings where the team teachers are supposed to be using the same instructional strategies, the same resources, and in extreme cases, be within 5 minutes of each other when a principal goes from one room to another to observe them. And that just takes all the joy out of teaching. My happiest years as a teacher were years that I got to be more free and more creative. I also think back in the day, it was understood by everyone that teachers and students had some kind of partnership. The percentages might vary from place to place, but generally it was a 50-50 effort. It was the teacher's job to instruct, to present the materials, to create the assignments, to assess the students. It was the student's job to complete the assignments and study the notes and the content that was provided. And I really feel like that has completely changed. It feels like it's 100% on the teacher and 0% on the student at this point. But realistically, it probably works out to 80% teacher, 20% student. But there are actually students that have not showed up for half the year, that haven't turned in any assignments, and that will still pass no matter what. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, the teacher will be held responsible for that student's failing data and test scores. So unless the buy-in is coming from someplace else, many students are lacking all natural motivation. In millennial world, we were motivated by something that often had nothing to do with the teacher. We didn't want to be in trouble with our parents. We didn't want to fail a class. Maybe we had a goal to go to a certain college or get a certain GPA. We didn't want to have to go to detention to make up tons of missing assignments. Very little motivation had to do with the force and charisma of the teacher's personality and their awesome engagement skills. Whereas now, it's completely flip-flopped. As I've mentioned before, students basically pass no matter what. Their grades are heavily inflated, where almost everybody, even when they do nothing, ends up with a B minus, sometimes even an A. Students can get away with all manner of terrible behavior. If the teacher does anything that the student doesn't like, they know that they can complain to somebody and the teacher is likely going to be in trouble and have to change. The question is, why wouldn't students misbehave? So by taking out some of these foundational stones, whole house has crumbled. And this is all happening over things that sound good on paper but don't work in real life. So as usual, I think this has to do with the pendulum swinging way too far to the other extreme, because I would definitely agree. I think there are some good things happening in modern education in spite of my complaining, because I do think in olden times, it was a lot easier for a teacher to put less effort into teaching and nobody to really question them on it. But I think now the pendulum has swung all the way over to the point where a teacher is the entertainer and the babysitter and the psychologist and needs to give TED Talks every day. They need to do an emotional check on each and every one of the students' feelings and be attuned to them at every point in the day. And on top of that, they need to somehow turn the most difficult material into some kind of game. Because the thinking goes, if they don't do those things, then it'll be their fault if the student fails. And I think we can afford to go back a little bit to the understanding that it is the student's responsibility to learn the content. Whether they like the teacher, whether they like the subject, whether they feel like it or not. Because I just don't think education really works with any other philosophy. And I definitely don't think that we're preparing students for college with the way things are now. We're essentially guaranteeing that college will have to conform to the standards of high school and middle school. And I can't imagine the consequences that that will have in the future. And at the end of the day, the modern expectations on teachers simply are not realistic. I can tell you with 100% honesty that I tried all of them. I used multimedia, technology, vocabulary, and brain pop. I did interactive quizzes and group assignments and cooperative learning strategies. I tapped into my theater background and was very, very energetic and funny. I was kind and caring. I did everything I could to give students the benefit of the doubt, and it really didn't work all that much. I definitely think that students did learn things while they were in the classroom, but they were not willing to put in the work when it was their turn. I left the classroom in April of 2021, and at that time there was still a hybrid of online and in-person, and I literally had about 90% of my students turning in nothing. Because the truth is, if you have a student that does not have any kind of internal motivation, and they have no plans on doing any hard work themselves, then there is not much the teacher can do. Although in this climate, the teacher will be blamed for that. And that is something that 90s and early 2000s teachers just didn't have to deal with. Truth is, one teacher simply cannot please everyone. What engages one student puts the other to sleep. What one student finds funny and entertaining, another student finds off-putting. And if you've ever worked with middle school students, you know that sometimes they actively choose not like something just to make a statement. There's nothing that the teacher did wrong. They just choose not to like that teacher. And again, when you're in that position, there's not a lot that can be done. I still remember that last semester, I had a group of girls, we'll call them the stank attitude crew, that literally decided they were going to push me on everything. They would purposely pretend to fall asleep in every single class that I had. They would all come in late on purpose because there was nothing I could do about it. They would all ask to leave to go to the bathroom and pout and complain if I wouldn't let them, even though they just had a 5-minute passing period where I watched them all stand and talk to each other. They wouldn't do any of their work. And those kind of attitudes are more common than you think. And back in the olden days, if me and my little millennial friends had tried anything like that, we would all be in trouble. It wouldn't have been tolerated. The teacher would have been allowed to call us on the carpet and say, I know what you're doing. You need to cut it out. Stop the rebellion. Stop the pouting. Stop the Jedi mind tricks. Cut it out, sit down, come to class, and do your work. If you don't, you're in trouble. Period. End of sentence. Fast forward to 2020 and beyond, and if I bring these kind of concerns to anyone, the question is, well, what did you do to upset them? How hard are you working to try to build a relationship? Well, have you understood why they really feel that way? Totally forgetting the middle school mindset. So circling way back to the original commenter's question, aren't teachers supposed to be the entertainers that motivate students with the worst attitude and babysit them as a side job? No, absolutely not. It was not always this way. Students did not always get away with the things that they get away with now. Parents didn't always tolerate this. Administrators didn't always support this. There was a time where teachers were allowed to teach. They were passionate about their subject. They cared about their students, but they weren't a therapist. They weren't a social worker. And they didn't need to give Grammy award-winning performances just to get their students to pay attention. Why? Because it was the student's job to pay attention. So what about you guys? What was it like when you were going to school? How were the teachers? How were you as a student? And where do you think all of this is going? If you haven't, I'd love if you'd like and subscribe and share. And thank you so much for watching. Let me know any of your video ideas and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.